3 hours after my parents watched a security guard send me to the service entrance of my sister's engagement party, my phone lit up with my mother's name. When I answered, she didn't say hello. Her voice came through ragged and sharp, like she'd been crying and yelling at the same time. "Pamela," she said, "the hotel just canceled everything. What did you do?" I stood very still in my kitchen, one heel already off, my black dress folded over the back of a chair, and for a second I just listened to her breathing. Because that question told me two things. First, something had gone very wrong after I left. And second, even now, my mother still believed I was the kind of woman who would destroy a night just because I was hurt. The truth was quieter than that. The truth usually is. 6 hours earlier, I had pulled up to the Sterling Hotel in a charcoal sedan, wearing a simple black dress and the pearl earrings my grandmother left me when I turned 30. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic. I wasn't there to make a scene. I was there because my sister Natalie was getting engaged, and despite everything, some part of me still believed family moments should be witnessed, even when you weren't fully welcome in them. The Sterling looked beautiful that night. Warm amber light spilled across the front steps. Crystal chandeliers glowed beyond the glass. Guests in silk and tailored suits drifted through the lobby with champagne already in their hands. It would have looked magical to anyone else. To me, it looked familiar. I had spent the last 6 months walking those halls with contractors, accountants, designers, and lawyers. I knew which marble tiles had been replaced in the lobby. I knew the floral arrangements had arrived 30 minutes early. I knew the ballroom air had to be kept 2 degrees cooler because candlelight and too many bodies made the room stuffy fast. I knew all of that because the Sterling was mine, and my family had no idea. If respect matters, subscribe. Not because this story is loud, but because some truths arrive quietly, and they still change everything. I stepped out of the car, smoothed my dress, and walked toward the front entrance of my own hotel. That was when the security guard stepped in front of me and said, "I'm sorry, ma'am, you'll need to go around back." For a second, I thought he was talking to someone behind me. I actually turned slightly, glancing over my shoulder at the sidewalk. No one. Just the city lights reflecting off the polished stone steps of the Sterling. "I'm sorry," I said. The security guard checked his clipboard again. He looked young, mid-20s maybe, professional, nervous in the way people get when they're following instructions they don't completely understand. "Pamela Seard?" he asked. "Yes." His finger tapped something on the page. "Right. I'm afraid you'll need to use the service entrance tonight." The words were delivered politely, almost apologetically, but they landed like a slap. "The service entrance?" I repeated. "Yes, ma'am. Around the back. Through the kitchen corridor." I didn't move. "Can I ask why?" He shifted slightly. "I'm just following event instructions." Event instructions. That meant one thing. Natalie. Through the glass doors behind him, I could see the hotel lobby glowing with warm light. Guests were gathering near the ballroom entrance, champagne flutes sparkling under the chandeliers, and standing about 15 feet inside the lobby was my mother, Victoria Seard. She saw me immediately. Our eyes met through the glass. For a moment, I waited for the normal reaction any mother would have in that situation. Surprise. Concern. Maybe she'd step forward and say, "There's been a mistake." Instead, she just stood there, watching. And then she smiled. Not the nervous kind. Not the embarrassed kind. It was the same proud smile she used when Natalie won awards in school. The same smile she wore at Natalie's college graduation. Except this time, it wasn't pride. It was satisfaction. Behind her, I could see Natalie near the ballroom doors, glowing in a cream silk dress, Bradley's arm around her waist, while guests circled like satellites around their perfect moment. My sister glanced toward the entrance. Toward me. Our eyes met for less than a second. Then she looked away. The security guard cleared his throat gently. "Ma'am, the service entrance is just around the corner. Some of you listening know exactly what that moment feels like. When the message isn't loud, but it's unmistakably clear. You are not supposed to belong here. If you've ever walked into a room where your own family made you feel like an outsider, tell me where you're listening from tonight. City, state, anywhere in the world. Because those quiet moments, they connect more people than we realize. I stood there another few seconds. Then I nodded. Of course, I said softly. I'll go around back. The guard looked relieved. He stepped aside, and I turned away from the front door of the Sterling Hotel. The hotel I had quietly purchased 6 months earlier. Heels clicking against the pavement, I walked toward the service entrance. Behind me, the chandeliers kept glowing. Inside, my sister's perfect night continued, and my family believed they had just put me exactly where I belonged. In the back. The service entrance to the Sterling sits behind the loading dock, past the delivery bays where produce trucks arrive before sunrise and catering vans pull in during the afternoon rush. It's not ugly, just honest. Concrete floors, stainless steel doors, fluorescent lights that buzz faintly overhead. The kind of place guests never see. I pushed the heavy metal door open and stepped inside. The smell hit first. Fresh bread, garlic, butter, a kitchen in full motion. Inside, the staff were moving quickly between prep stations, knives tapping cutting boards, steam lifting from stock pots, plates stacked and ready for service. For a moment, no one noticed me. Then Chef Rivera looked up. He froze. The head chef of the Sterling had worked in 5-star kitchens from Chicago to San Francisco. I'd hired him personally 3 months earlier after tasting a lemon butter halibut that made me immediately offer him the job. Now he stood perfectly still, a wooden spoon hovering over a pan. "Miss Seard," he said quietly. The entire kitchen went silent. One by one, heads turned. A prep cook stopped mid-chop. A dishwasher nearly dropped a rack of glasses. A server holding a tray of champagne flutes blinked like he'd just seen a ghost. Because everyone in that room knew 2 things at once. First, I owned the building they were standing in. Second, I had just walked through the employee entrance like a delivery driver. I offered Chef Rivera a small smile. "Good evening." His eyes flicked toward the door behind me, then back to my face. "We weren't expecting you through this entrance," he said carefully. "I know." Silence stretched across the kitchen. No one asked why. No one needed to. They'd seen the guest list. Marcus, the hotel's general manager, had already flagged it earlier that week. My name. Redirect to service entrance if she appears. I could feel the staff watching me now. Not with curiosity, with something closer to concern. "Please," I said gently. "Don't stop on my account." Rivera set his spoon down slowly. "The salmon will be ready in 20 minutes, Miss Seard. I'm sure it will be perfect." A few nervous smiles appeared around the room. The kitchen slowly resumed motion, but quieter, more careful. I walked past the stainless prep counters, past stacks of white china, past trays of appetizers waiting to be carried into the ballroom. And at the end of the corridor, a small door with a round glass window waited. Through it, I could see the engagement party in full swing. Crystal chandeliers, soft violin music, 200 well-dressed guests. And at the center of it all, Natalie, radiant, perfect, exactly the daughter my mother had always wanted. I paused there for a moment, because moments like this matter. They're crossroads. You can leave. You can explode. Or you can walk forward calmly and let the truth reveal itself when it's ready. I chose the third option. Before I opened the door, I pulled my phone from my clutch. One message from Daniel waited. "Daniel, at the bar, in the northeast corner. Ready whenever you are." Daniel Webb had been my friend since college. Now he was also my attorney. And tonight, he carried something important. Documentation. Just in case. I typed back. "Pamela. Not yet." Then I slipped the phone away, straightened my shoulders, and opened the door. Soft violin music washed over me. Conversations hummed. Champagne glasses clinked. No one noticed when I stepped inside, which made sense. For most of my life in this family, I had been invisible. The ballroom looked exactly the way I had approved it. Soft gold lighting, ivory tablecloths, tall arrangements of white orchids and pale roses. The Sterling had one of the most beautiful event spaces in the city, and tonight every detail had been executed perfectly. 200 guests filled the room in clusters of laughter and polite conversation, while a string quartet played near the windows. For anyone else, it would have looked like a dream engagement party. For me, it looked like a business report. I knew the invoice. $85,000. That was the total cost of Natalie's engagement celebration. I knew because the contract had crossed my desk 3 weeks earlier. I moved along the edge of the ballroom quietly, keeping close to the wall as servers passed with trays of champagne. No one stopped me. No one asked my name. No one noticed I was there. Exactly as planned. Across the room, my mother stood beside the gift table, speaking animatedly with a small group of guests. Her posture was perfect. Her smile practiced. That smile had been perfected over decades of charity luncheons, neighborhood galas, and country club dinners. And right now she was using it to tell someone about Natalie. My daughter graduated top of her class at Columbia, she said proudly. Bradley's family is very impressed. The woman she was speaking to nodded politely. The Harringtons are very selective, you know, my mother continued. Natalie has always known how to build a proper life. The words drifted across the room and settled somewhere heavy inside my chest. Natalie. Always Natalie. Across every holiday dinner, every birthday, every conversation. My phone vibrated softly in my hand. Daniel again. Daniel, you're officially the calmest person in this room. I glanced toward the northeast corner. He stood near the bar, tall, relaxed, wearing the same slightly amused expression he had worn since college whenever chaos unfolded around him. Our eyes met. He lifted his glass slightly. A silent question. I gave the smallest shake of my head. Not yet. Some of you listening understand something important about moments like this. Recognition doesn't always arrive when you want it. Sometimes the truth needs to walk into the room on its own time. If you understand quiet strength, you belong here. Subscribe and stand for dignity. Because stories like this aren't about revenge. They're about refusing to shrink yourself for people who never made space for you. A burst of laughter rippled across the room. Natalie had stepped onto the small stage near the dance floor. The quartet quieted. Guests turned their attention toward her. She looked beautiful. Cream silk dress. Diamond ring catching the light. Bradley stood beside her with his arm around her waist. The perfect couple. My fiancé would like to say a few words, Bradley announced. Applause followed. Natalie smiled the way she always did when the spotlight found her. Thank you all for being here tonight, she said. Her voice was warm, confident, effortless. This night means everything to Bradley and me. More applause. She began thanking people. Bradley's parents, his business partners, her closest friends who had flown in, and of course, my incredible mother. Natalie lifted her glass toward Victoria. The crowd followed. My mother placed a hand on her chest, visibly touched. I wouldn't be the woman I am today without you, Natalie continued. Guests murmured approval. Then she paused. Her eyes drifted across the ballroom slowly. And for just a fraction of a second, they landed on me. Recognition flickered there. Brief. Sharp. Then she smiled again. And thank you to everyone who made the effort to be here tonight. She tilted her head slightly. Family is about commitment, about people who understand what it means to build something lasting. A small ripple of polite laughter moved through the crowd. And then she added lightly, of course, not everyone in a family always understands that. It was subtle, but the meaning landed. Right on cue. A few people chuckled awkwardly. And somewhere across the room, Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. But I didn't react. I just stood there quietly, holding my champagne glass. waiting. Because the most powerful moments don't happen when someone speaks loudly. They happen when the truth finally walks into the room, uninvited. The applause faded slowly after Natalie finished speaking. Guests lifted their glasses. Servers moved again through the crowd. Music from the quartet returned softly, filling the spaces between conversations. From the outside, the engagement party looked perfect again. But something had shifted. Small glances were being exchanged now. A few guests had noticed the comment Natalie slipped into her speech, the one about family members who don't understand commitment. It was subtle. But subtle insults are a specialty in certain families. I had grown up fluent in them. I took a sip of champagne and stayed near the wall. Across the ballroom, my mother had already begun retelling Natalie's accomplishments to a new group of guests. Top of her class at Columbia, she repeated proudly. Bradley's family is just wonderful, such a respected name in the city. One of the women nodded politely. You must be very proud. Victoria smiled. Oh, I am. Natalie has always been exceptional. The woman tilted her head slightly. I thought you had 2 daughters? The question floated gently through the air. For a moment, my mother froze. It lasted less than a second. Then she laughed lightly. Yes, of course. Pamela is my younger one. She waved her hand vaguely. She's still figuring things out. The words landed exactly the way they always had. Dismissive. Neat. Efficient. A few guests nodded politely and moved on with the conversation. But not everyone looked comfortable. Near the bar, Daniel stared down into his drink. He didn't look at me, but I could tell he had heard every word. Some of you listening have felt that moment. When someone reduces your entire life to a single sentence, still figuring things out. As if your work, your effort, your years of building something real somehow disappear because the wrong person is telling the story. That sentence had followed me for a decade. Even after I bought my first property. Even after I turned a struggling 10-room bed and breakfast into a profitable business. Even after I quietly expanded that business into 4 hotels. To my family, I was still the daughter who hadn't figured things out. Across the ballroom, Natalie stepped down from the stage and immediately disappeared into another circle of guests. She was glowing, receiving compliments, admiration, exactly where she believed she belonged. I watched her for a moment. Then someone stepped beside me. Pam. Daniel. He kept his voice low. That speech was something. Was it? I asked calmly. He glanced toward Natalie. Your sister's not exactly subtle. She thinks she is. Daniel studied my face carefully. You okay? I'm fine. He nodded slowly. Then he leaned a little closer. I did some quiet checking earlier tonight. Oh? Your name is on the guest management list. I smiled faintly. I know. His eyebrow lifted. You knew? Marcus emailed me about it earlier this week. And you still came? Yes. Daniel shook his head slightly. You might be the calmest, dangerous person I know. Dangerous? You're letting them walk straight into the truth. I looked around the ballroom again. The laughter. The champagne. My mother proudly introducing Natalie to Bradley's relatives. No, I said quietly. I'm just done hiding. Daniel followed my gaze. Across the room, Natalie had finally noticed me again. This time, she didn't look away. She whispered something to Bradley. Then she started walking toward me. And behind her, my mother was already moving too. Natalie reached me first. She stopped about 3 feet away, her smile perfectly in place for anyone watching. Up close, she looked even more polished than she had on the stage. Cream silk dress. Hair pinned carefully over one shoulder. The diamond Bradley had given her caught the chandelier light every time she moved her hand. Oh, she said lightly. You actually came. Daniel took a slow sip of his drink, but didn't speak. Congratulations, Natalie, I said. Thank you. Her tone stayed pleasant, but her eyes were studying me carefully now. I wasn't sure you'd feel comfortable here. I'm managing. Behind her, 3 of her friends had drifted closer, forming a small audience without pretending otherwise. Natalie tilted her head slightly. You know, Bradley's family is very traditional. I gathered that. They value stability, reputation, achievement. She glanced down at my black dress for half a second. So, we had to be careful about certain arrangements tonight. Arrangements, I repeated. Her smile widened just enough to make the meaning clear. The entrance situation, for example. Behind me, Daniel shifted his weight slightly. I could feel him resisting the urge to say something. I understand perfectly, I said calmly. Good. Natalie lifted her champagne glass and took a small sip. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, you might want to stay toward the edges of the room tonight. Bradley's family doesn't really know you. That's true. She looked relieved I hadn't argued. Wonderful. She turned slightly, ready to return to the center of attention. Then she paused. Oh, one more thing. Her eyes moved toward the door I had entered through. How exactly did you get in? Daniel looked at me. Natalie continued before I could answer. I specifically told security. She stopped herself. Too late. I held her gaze. You specifically told them what, Natalie? Her smile tightened. Nothing. It's not important. I used the service entrance, I said quietly. For the first time that night, Natalie looked surprised. She had expected me to argue, to make a scene, to demand to be let through the front door. Instead, I had followed her instructions exactly. Oh, she said slowly. Yes. One of her friends let out a small, nervous laugh. Well, Natalie said briskly, smoothing her dress. I'm glad that worked out. Before she could leave, another voice cut in. Pamela, my mother. Victoria stepped into the space beside Natalie with the calm authority she used when correcting children in public. Can I speak with you for a moment? Her hand lightly guided me toward a small alcove near the service corridor. Daniel stayed behind, but I could feel his eyes following us. When we were just far enough away from the main crowd, my mother dropped the polite expression. What are you doing here? She asked sharply. Attending my sister's engagement party. Don't be clever. Her voice lowered further. You know exactly what I mean. I folded my hands calmly in front of me. I was invited. Barely. She glanced toward the ballroom to make sure no one important was listening. This is Natalie's night. Don't ruin it. I haven't done anything. Good, she said quickly. Keep it that way. Her eyes traveled over my dress. A faint look of disappointment crossed her face. Couldn't you have worn something more festive? I didn't answer. The Harringtons are watching, she continued. I won't have you embarrassing this family. Something inside me shifted quietly. A door closing. Embarrassing us? I asked. Yes. I held her gaze. Who exactly is us, Mom? Before she could answer, a voice spoke behind her. Professional. Calm. Careful. Excuse me, Mrs. Seard. We both turned. Marcus stood there, the general manager of the Sterling Hotel, and the man who had been waiting all evening for the moment he could finally approach me. His eyes moved from my mother to me. Miss Seard, he said respectfully. May I have a word? My mother frowned. Can't you see I'm speaking with my daughter? She snapped. Marcus didn't move. In 8 years as the Sterling's general manager, he had dealt with politicians, celebrities, and more than a few people who believed money made them untouchable. He had perfected the art of respectful patience. Of course, he said evenly. However, the matter requires authorization from management. Then find management, my mother replied sharply. This is an engagement party, not a staff meeting. Marcus nodded politely. Then he turned his attention fully to me. Miss Seard, he said calmly, there's an issue with the seafood shipment for tonight's dinner service. The world seemed to slow slightly. I could feel my mother's eyes on my face. Is there? I asked. Yes, ma'am. He kept his voice professional. The Atlantic salmon that arrived this afternoon didn't meet our quality standards. Chef Rivera recommends switching to the king salmon from the reserve supply. He paused. But I'll need approval from the owner before making that adjustment. The word hung in the air. Owner. My mother blinked. I'm sorry, she said slowly. Marcus continued as if nothing unusual had happened. The king salmon will pair better with the citrus reduction we prepared earlier, but the change will affect the plating schedule. Then he added gently, Your decision, Miss Seard. The silence around us widened. Behind my mother, a few nearby guests had started to notice the conversation. Natalie turned from across the ballroom. She saw Marcus standing beside me. Then she heard the word. Owner. Her expression changed instantly. What did you just call her? Natalie asked. Marcus turned toward her politely. I addressed Miss Pamela Seard, he said. The owner of the Sterling Hotel. The room didn't explode. It didn't gasp dramatically. Instead, something quieter happened. Conversation stopped. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. The music from the quartet continued softly, completely unaware that the emotional temperature in the ballroom had dropped 10 degrees. My mother stared at me. No, she said immediately. That's not possible. I met Marcus's eyes calmly. The king salmon will be fine, I told him. Have Chef Rivera adjust the sauce. The citrus reduction will work better than the dill. Marcus inclined his head slightly. Excellent choice, ma'am. He turned smoothly and walked back toward the service corridor. And just like that, the truth entered the room. Natalie took a step toward me. You're lying, she said. Her voice had lost its polish. You don't own this hotel. I do. You're making this up to embarrass me. I shook my head gently. I bought the Sterling 6 months ago. That's impossible, my mother said quickly. We would know. I looked at her. How? Silence. You never asked what I do, I continued calmly. You never asked how my business was going. You never asked where I spend most of my time. Natalie laughed nervously. This is ridiculous. Several guests were now openly watching us. Phones had begun appearing in hands. Someone whispered. And from the head table near the stage, a woman stood. Tall. Elegant. Silver hair perfectly arranged. The kind of presence that shifts a room without raising her voice. Eleanor Harrington. Bradley's mother. She walked slowly toward us. And when she spoke, her voice carried across the ballroom without effort. I'm sorry, Eleanor said calmly. Did I just hear someone say, you own this hotel? Every conversation in the ballroom seemed to pause at once. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that spreads when someone important asks a question. Eleanor Harrington stopped a few feet away from us, her posture perfectly straight, her expression composed in the way powerful people learn early in life. She wasn't angry. She was curious. And curiosity, coming from someone like Eleanor, carried weight. I met her gaze. Yes, I said calmly. I own the Sterling. Natalie let out a sharp laugh beside me. She's joking, she said quickly. My sister likes to exaggerate things. Eleanor didn't look at Natalie. Her eyes stayed on me. How long have you owned it? She asked. 6 months. A ripple moved through the nearby guests. 6 months. That meant the hotel had already belonged to me when Natalie booked her engagement party. Natalie shook her head. No, that's not. My mother interrupted quickly. She's misunderstanding something, Victoria said. Pamela has always been entrepreneurial. The pause before that word was small, but it was there. She's tried several little projects over the years. Little projects. I said nothing. Because people reveal more when you let them keep talking. Eleanor's gaze finally shifted to my mother. You described Pamela differently when we met last month, she said thoughtfully. Victoria's smile tightened. Did I? Yes. Eleanor tilted her head slightly. You said your younger daughter was still finding her direction. A murmur moved through the room. Victoria's composure flickered. Well, she's always been independent. Natalie stepped forward again, desperate to regain control. This is ridiculous, she said. Anyone can claim to own something. She turned toward me. Prove it. I didn't move. I don't need to prove anything, Natalie. Of course you don't, she snapped, because you can't. Eleanor raised one elegant hand slightly. The room quieted again. Verification would be helpful, she said calmly. Her tone wasn't accusing. It was procedural, as if she were reviewing a business proposal. Before I could respond, a familiar voice spoke beside me. I anticipated that. Daniel stepped forward smoothly. He held a leather folder in one hand. Daniel Webb, he said politely. Attorney for Miss Pamela Seard. Natalie blinked. My mother looked like she might actually stop breathing. Daniel opened the folder and handed several documents to Eleanor. The acquisition paperwork, he explained calmly. Property transfer records, all public filings. Eleanor accepted the documents without comment. She scanned the first page quickly, then the next, then the final signature line. The ballroom had become so quiet that the faint scratch of paper turning sounded loud. Finally, Eleanor looked up. Her eyes moved from the papers to me, then to my mother. The Sterling Hotel, she said slowly, was acquired 6 months ago. Her gaze sharpened. By Pamela Catherine Seard. A long silence followed. Natalie's face drained of color. That's not possible, she whispered. My mother looked at me as if seeing a stranger. You never told us, she said weakly. I held her gaze. You never asked. Someone near the back of the room quietly said, Oh my God. Phones were definitely out now. Guests were already searching the hotel's ownership online. A woman near the bar whispered something to her husband and showed him her screen. Confirmation. Across the room, Bradley stared at Natalie like a man who had just discovered an entirely new version of the family he was about to marry into. And Eleanor Harrington slowly folded the documents closed. Then she looked directly at my mother. You had the owner of the building redirected to the service entrance. Victoria's lips parted. No answer came. The silence said, Enough. Some of you listening already know this moment. It's the moment when the truth doesn't need to shout anymore. It simply stands in the room and waits for everyone else to catch up. The silence that followed Eleanor's question was heavy. Not loud. Not chaotic. Just thick enough that everyone in the ballroom could feel it. My mother opened her mouth once, closed it, then tried again. I didn't know, she said weakly. Eleanor studied her carefully. You didn't know your own daughter owned the building we're standing in? Victoria looked suddenly smaller than I had ever seen her. She never told us, she said. I spoke quietly. You never asked. Natalie stepped forward again, her voice tight with panic. This is insane. She probably inherited it. Several heads turned. Eleanor's eyes flicked toward me again. Did you? No. No one funded me. No one handed me a shortcut, I said calmly. And my parents didn't invest in my business. Natalie's voice sharpened. So where did the money come from? A 10-room bed and breakfast I bought 8 years ago. The room was still listening. I continued. It needed repairs. I took a loan the bank almost refused to give me. I glanced briefly at my mother. 18% interest. A few people winced quietly. I renovated it myself. Ran it for 2 years. Sold it. Bought another property. Then another. Daniel leaned slightly closer to the group, but said nothing. I finished simply. The Sterling is the 4th hotel I've acquired. A murmur rolled through the crowd. Across the room, a woman whispered, That's impressive. Natalie's face had gone pale beneath her makeup. You're lying. I didn't respond. Because at that point, the facts had already done the work. Eleanor looked back at the documents in her hands. No outstanding debt, she said quietly. No partners. She closed the folder. Sole proprietor. Bradley spoke for the first time. His voice sounded different now. Less confident. You never mentioned any of this, he said to Natalie. Natalie turned toward him quickly. Because it's not relevant. Eleanor's eyebrow lifted slightly. It's extremely relevant. Natalie shook her head. She's exaggerating. Pamela always liked dramatic stories. The word dramatic hung in the air. Daniel finally spoke. County property records are public, he said politely. A guest near the bar lifted his phone. They're online, he confirmed. A few seconds later, someone else said quietly, It's true. Natalie stopped speaking. Because there was nothing left to argue. Across the room, the quartet had quietly stopped playing. No one had asked them to. But even the musicians could feel the shift in the atmosphere. Eleanor Harrington turned slowly toward my mother again. When we met last month, she said calmly, you described your family as modest. Victoria swallowed. Yes. You also said Pamela was struggling. My mother said nothing. Eleanor's voice remained gentle. But apparently she owns one of the most successful boutique hotels in the city. She paused. And you arranged for her to enter through the service corridor. My mother's hands trembled slightly around her champagne glass. I didn't realize, she whispered. And for the first time in my life, I saw something flicker across her face that might have been shame. Eleanor handed the documents back to Daniel. Then she turned toward Bradley. We need to talk. The words were quiet, but everyone in the ballroom understood their weight. Bradley nodded slowly. Natalie grabbed his arm. Bradley, don't listen to... Later, he said. Just that. Later. And suddenly Natalie looked very small in the middle of the room that had been built entirely for her celebration. I watched all of it without speaking, because the moment I had waited for wasn't revenge. It was recognition. And recognition had finally arrived. Quietly. Exactly the way truth usually does. Before we continue, let me pause for a second. Real power moves in silence. Subscribe. Not because this story is dramatic, but because quiet dignity deserves a place to stand. Now let's go back to the moment when my mother finally turned toward me and asked the question she had avoided for 30 years. My mother looked at me the way people look at a puzzle when they realize they've been holding the wrong picture the entire time. Confused. Embarrassed. Trying to understand how everything they believed about you could suddenly be wrong. Pamela, she said quietly. It was the first time that night she had said my name without irritation in her voice. When did this happen? 6 months ago, I replied. No, she said, shaking her head slowly. I mean, all of it. For a moment, neither of us spoke, because the real answer wasn't 6 months. It was 8 years. 8 years of building something piece by piece while my family kept telling the same story about who I was. Natalie broke the silence. This is ridiculous, she said sharply. So you bought a hotel. That doesn't change anything. But it already had. Guests were no longer pretending not to watch. Conversations had fully stopped now. People weren't whispering anymore. They were listening. Natalie turned toward Bradley again. She's doing this on purpose, she said. She waited until tonight to humiliate me. I didn't wait for anything, I said calmly. You bought the hotel knowing I was having my engagement party here. I bought the hotel before you even started dating Bradley. Her mouth opened, then closed. That was information she hadn't expected. Across the room, someone quietly said, Wow. Eleanor Harrington had not moved. She was still studying the entire situation the way someone studies a business negotiation. Carefully, looking at everyone involved. Let me clarify something, she said finally. Her voice was calm, but it cut cleanly through the room. You invited your sister to this event. She looked at Natalie, while also instructing security to send her to the service entrance. Natalie's face flushed. That's not what I meant. What did you mean? Natalie looked at my mother for support. Victoria looked away. And suddenly, Natalie didn't have the safety net she'd always relied on. I just didn't want drama, she muttered. Eleanor's eyebrow lifted slightly. And you believe sending her through the kitchen corridor would prevent drama? Natalie said nothing. The room was very quiet. Some of you listening know that moment. the moment when the person who has controlled the story for years suddenly runs out of words. Eleanor turned toward me again. "Miss Seard," she said politely. "Yes? I'd like to apologize for any misunderstanding tonight." Her tone was sincere, professional. "I appreciate that," I said. She studied me for a moment longer. Then she reached into her clutch and removed a small card. "If you ever feel inclined to discuss business opportunities," she said, handing it to me, "I would welcome the conversation." The room noticed that too. Because when someone like Eleanor Harrington offers you her direct card, it means something. I accepted it. "Thank you. Please call me Eleanor." She leaned slightly closer and lowered her voice just enough that only I could hear. "I prefer knowing who the interesting people in a room actually are." Then she straightened and turned back toward her son. Bradley still looked unsettled. Natalie looked like the floor had disappeared under her. My mother had gone completely silent. And for the first time in my life, every single person in that room was looking directly at me. Not past me. Not through me. At me. Recognition can be strange when you've lived without it for a long time. It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like clarity. And clarity is quieter than people expect. Across the ballroom, Daniel lifted his glass slightly in my direction. Not a celebration. Just acknowledgment. The kind that says, "You handled that exactly right." But the night wasn't finished yet, because my sister suddenly turned back toward me, and the look in her eyes told me she still had one more thing to say. Natalie took 2 quick steps toward me. Her composure was slipping now. The perfect hostess mask she had worn all evening was cracking at the edges. "You planned this," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but in a room that's silent, everyone heard it. "You knew my engagement party was here, and you waited until tonight to reveal everything." I looked at her. "I didn't reveal anything. You let that manager say it in front of everyone. He asked me a business question." Natalie shook her head. "No. You wanted this moment." There was a tremor in her voice now. "You wanted to humiliate me." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Across the room, Bradley watched the exchange carefully. I spoke calmly. "Natalie, I didn't ask security to redirect you through the kitchen tonight." Her face flushed deeper. "That's different." "Is it?" Silence. Because the truth had a way of sitting in the middle of the room once it arrived. My mother stepped forward again. "Pamela," she said quickly. "This has gone far enough." I turned toward her. "Has it?" "You've made your point." "I didn't come to make a point." Victoria's eyes darted around the room. Guests were definitely listening now. Phones were still out. The Harrington family stood only a few feet away. "This is your sister's engagement," she said sharply. "Stop escalating things." "I haven't escalated anything." My voice stayed quiet. "I walked in through the door Natalie requested." Natalie crossed her arms tightly. "You could have left." "I could have. And yet here you are." "Yes." She let out a frustrated breath. "Why?" The question hung there, and for a moment, I thought about giving the simple answer. "Because you invited me." But the truth was deeper than that. "I came," I said slowly, "because I was tired of pretending I didn't belong in rooms where I've spent my entire adult life, building something real." The ballroom stayed silent. My mother stared at me. Natalie said nothing. "I didn't come to embarrass anyone," I continued. "I came because you told security to send me through the service entrance." I paused. "And you watched it happen." My mother's face tightened. "That's not fair." "It's exactly what happened." She didn't deny it. Because she couldn't. For 30 years I had tried to explain these moments away. Told myself I was being sensitive, overreacting, imagining things. But that night the entire room had seen it. And sometimes the clearest form of justice isn't punishment. It's witnesses. Daniel stepped a little closer to my side now. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Some of you listening know what quiet support looks like. Someone standing beside you when the truth finally comes out. Across the room, Eleanor Harrington watched the entire exchange with calm interest. Bradley rubbed the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable. Natalie's voice dropped again. "So what now?" she asked. I looked around the ballroom. The music had stopped. The champagne glasses were half full. The night that was supposed to celebrate her had turned into something else entirely. "I'm not canceling your party," I said. Natalie blinked. "What?" "The event will continue exactly as planned." My mother looked surprised. "You're not?" "No." I shook my head gently. "This is your night." Natalie stared at me, confused. "Then what do you want?" It was a fair question. I took a slow breath and answered honestly. "I want you to understand something." The room waited. "I'm not here to prove I'm better than you." I looked at both of them. "My entire life, you've treated me like I was less." Natalie opened her mouth. I raised a hand slightly. "Not aggressive. Just steady. And I'm done accepting that." The words landed softly. But they carried weight. Because sometimes the strongest boundary isn't loud. It's simply the moment someone refuses to shrink anymore. If this story feels familiar in your life, stay with us. Strength doesn't beg. It builds. Subscribe. Because the calm ones often win last. And in that ballroom, I could feel something else beginning to change. Not in me. In them. For a long moment, no one spoke. The air in the ballroom felt different now, quieter, heavier, like the room itself was trying to process what had just happened. Natalie was the first to break the silence. "So that's it?" she said. Her voice had lost the confident sparkle it had earlier in the night. "You just stand there, drop this bomb in the middle of my engagement party, and suddenly we're supposed to pretend everything's normal?" "I didn't drop anything," I replied. The truth was already here. It just hadn't been said out loud yet. She shook her head, frustrated. "You're unbelievable." Before I could respond, another voice entered the conversation. Bradley. He had been quiet most of the evening, but now he stepped forward, his expression thoughtful rather than angry. "Pamela," he said carefully, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." He hesitated, glancing briefly at Natalie before continuing. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone in your family about the hotel?" The question was sincere, not accusatory, just confused. And I understood why. From the outside, it probably looked strange. Someone builds a business big enough to purchase one of the city's most respected boutique hotels and never mentions it to their own family. I thought about the answer for a second. "Because no one asked," I said simply. Bradley frowned slightly. "That can't be the whole reason." "It's a big part of it." I glanced toward my mother. Every time we talked, the conversation was about Natalie, her career, her relationship, her future. Victoria looked uncomfortable now. "That's not true." "Mom," I said gently, "the last time we spoke before this week, you spent 20 minutes telling me about Natalie's promotion and never once asked how my work was going." She didn't respond. "Because she remembered," Natalie scoffed. "Oh, please. You could have brought it up yourself." I tried. "When?" 3 years ago," I said. "At Thanksgiving. I mentioned I was negotiating the purchase of my third property." Natalie frowned slightly. "I don't remember that." "You changed the subject to Bradley's new investment fund." Bradley blinked. "That happened?" Natalie shrugged. "Well, it wasn't relevant to the conversation." There it was again. Not relevant. My entire career, neatly dismissed in 3 words. Eleanor Harrington watched the exchange quietly. Finally, she spoke. "I find this fascinating." Everyone looked at her. She continued calmly. "In business, when someone builds something successful, the first instinct is curiosity." She turned toward my mother. "You ask questions. You want to understand how it happened." Victoria's shoulders stiffened. Eleanor looked back at me. But apparently, no one here ever felt the need. "No," I said softly. "They didn't." Across the ballroom, the tension was easing slightly now, but guests were still watching carefully. No one had left. Because moments like this were rare. Not loud drama, but truth unfolding in real time. Bradley exhaled slowly. Well, he said, almost to himself, I guess we all learned something tonight. Natalie shot him a sharp look. Whose side are you on? That's not the point. It feels like the point. He didn't respond. Instead, he looked at me again. For what it's worth, he said quietly, what you built is impressive. The compliment surprised me, not because it came from him, but because it had never come from anyone standing beside my family before. Across the room, Daniel lifted his glass again slightly. A small smile. Not smug. Just proud. Moments like this don't fix families. They don't erase years of misunderstanding. But they do something important. They change the story people tell about you. And once the story changes, it's impossible to go back to pretending it never existed. I looked at Natalie one more time. Her engagement party was still going on around us, but the night had already shifted into something else entirely. And deep down, I think she knew it too. Because the next thing she said wasn't angry. It was quiet. You could have told me, she said. And for the first time all evening, her voice sounded unsure. Natalie's voice had changed. The sharp edge was still there, but underneath it was something else now. Uncertainty. You could have told me, she repeated. For a moment I didn't answer. Because technically, she was right. I could have told her. I could have called 6 months earlier and said, by the way, I just purchased the Sterling Hotel. I could have shared the article the business section of the Tribune wrote about the acquisition. I could have sent a photo the first day I walked through the renovated lobby. But those things require something simple between people. Interest. You never asked, I said again, gently. Natalie looked down at her ring for a second, turning it slowly around her finger. That's not fair, she muttered. But the words didn't carry the same confidence they had earlier. My mother finally spoke again. Her voice was quieter now, too. So what happens now? She asked. It was such a strange question. Not because she asked it, but because for the first time in my life, she was asking me. I looked around the ballroom. The party was slowly coming back to life again. The quartet had resumed playing. Guests were speaking again, though softer than before. The tension was fading, but the memory of the moment would stay. Nothing happens, I said. Natalie frowned. What do you mean nothing? I mean exactly that. I gestured toward the tables. The food will be served soon. The staff had already started moving again near the kitchen doors. The speeches are done. The music will start. People will dance. I met her eyes. Your engagement party continues. Natalie blinked. You're not going to do anything? No. My mother looked surprised. You're not angry? I was, I said. Earlier tonight. The honesty seemed to catch her off guard. But anger gets tired, I continued. And right now I'm just clear. Clear about what? She asked. About who I am. The words settled quietly between us. I'm not the daughter who never figured things out, I said. I'm not the embarrassing sister you have to hide from important guests. Natalie's shoulders stiffened slightly. I never said. You didn't have to. Silence again. But here's the part that matters, I continued. I didn't come tonight to prove anything. I glanced around the room. To you, to Mom, to anyone. Daniel shifted beside me slightly, because he knew what I was about to say. I came because I'm done shrinking myself to fit the version of me that makes everyone else comfortable. My mother looked down at the floor. Natalie said nothing. And sometimes silence says everything. Across the ballroom, Eleanor Harrington had resumed her seat beside her husband. But she was still watching, observing, like someone witnessing the end of a long negotiation. Some of you listening know exactly how that moment feels. The moment you realize you're not fighting anymore. Not because you lost. Because you finally understand you don't need the argument. If you've ever reached that point in your own life, type "stand" in the comments. Because quiet strength often grows in places where people expected you to break. I took a slow breath. Then I looked back at Natalie. You should enjoy your party. She hesitated. You're leaving? Yes. That answer seemed to surprise everyone. My mother spoke quickly. Pamela, you don't have to go. But there was uncertainty in her voice. Like she wasn't sure what she was allowed to ask anymore. I know, I said. But I've already stayed long enough. I turned slightly toward Daniel. Ready? He nodded. Always. As we started walking toward the main entrance, I could feel the room watching again. But this time the feeling was different. Not curiosity. Not dismissal. Recognition. And that's when my mother called my name again. Pamela. I stopped. Turned. Because something in her voice this time sounded different. Pamela. My mother's voice stopped me halfway to the front doors. The ballroom had grown quieter again, as if people sensed something unfinished between us. I turned back. For a moment, Victoria Seard, always composed, always certain, looked almost unsure of herself. I didn't realize, she said slowly, about the hotel, about any of it. Her words weren't an apology. But they weren't the old dismissal either. I know, I replied. Natalie stood beside her, arms folded tightly, mascara beginning to smudge beneath one eye. The perfect engagement night image had cracked. You could have told us, my mother added. I held her gaze. I tried to be seen for a long time, Mom. The sentence was quiet, but it landed harder than anything I had said earlier. She didn't argue. Behind her, guests had resumed their conversations, though many were still watching discreetly. Natalie finally spoke again, softer than before. So you're really just leaving? Yes. I gestured gently toward the ballroom. This night is still yours. Daniel opened the front doors for me. Cool evening air drifted inside the lobby. Before stepping out, I looked back once more at the room, at my sister, at my mother. Take care of each other, I said. Then I walked out the front entrance of the Sterling Hotel, the door they never meant for me to use. The night air outside the Sterling felt cooler than I expected. For a moment, I just stood on the front steps. The same steps where, 3 hours earlier, a security guard had politely told me to go around back. Now the doors were open behind me. Daniel stepped out beside me, adjusting his jacket. Well, he said quietly, that was one of the calmest earthquakes I've ever witnessed. I let out a small breath that almost felt like a laugh. Did it look that dramatic? Pam, he said, half the room just learned the invisible sister owns the building. Fair point. Across the street, traffic moved steadily through the evening. Inside the hotel, music had started again, faint violin drifting through the glass doors. The party was continuing. Exactly as I had promised. Daniel glanced at me. You okay? I thought about it for a second. About the front door. About my mother's face when she realized the truth. About Natalie standing in the center of the room that suddenly didn't feel quite as secure anymore. Yeah, I said finally. I think I am. He nodded. Then his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and raised one eyebrow. Well, he said slowly. That didn't take long. Who is it? I asked. Daniel turned the phone toward me. Caller ID read. Victoria Seard. My mother. Daniel looked from the phone to me. You want me to answer? I shook my head. No. The call ended before it could ring a third time. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Through the glass doors behind us, I could still see the glow of the Sterling's lobby. Guests moved past the windows in soft blurs of color. The engagement party was continuing, just as I had promised Natalie it would. My phone buzzed in my clutch. This time it was my screen lighting up. Mom. I stared at the name. Daniel waited quietly. She's going to panic tonight, he said gently. Everything she thought she understood just changed. I finally answered. Hello? My mother's voice came through immediately, tight with emotion. Pamela. What did you do? I frowned slightly. Nothing. The hotel just canceled the dessert service. she said quickly. Marcus told the staff something about a management decision. I exhaled slowly. For the first time that night, I actually smiled. I didn't cancel anything, Mom, I said. But if something changed inside the Sterling tonight, I glanced back at the glowing hotel doors. It probably wasn't the dessert. There was a pause on the line. The kind where someone is trying to decide whether they believe you. Inside the Sterling, I could see guests drifting toward the ballroom again. A server crossed the lobby carrying a tray of champagne, moving carefully between small groups of people still talking about what had just happened. Pamela, my mother said finally, her voice lower now. Eleanor Harrington just asked to speak with me. I wasn't surprised. Eleanor didn't strike me as someone who ignored new information. What did she say? I asked. She asked why we never mentioned your business, my mother admitted. And what did you tell her? Another silence. I told her, we didn't know. I leaned lightly against the stone railing of the steps. That's true. My mother exhaled slowly. She seemed very interested in you. That part made Daniel glance at me. Across the street, a car passed, headlights sliding across the hotel windows. Well, I said gently, Eleanor Harrington seems like someone who pays attention when the facts change. My mother hesitated. Pamela, did we really not know anything about your work? No, I answered calmly. You just never looked closely enough. The line stayed quiet for a few seconds. I could hear the faint hum of music from inside the ballroom through my mother's phone. The engagement party was still happening, but the energy had clearly shifted. Pamela, my mother said slowly. Eleanor also asked something else. What was that? She asked why Natalie felt the need to hide you from the front entrance. I closed my eyes briefly. Across the steps, Daniel leaned against the railing, watching the street. And what did you tell her? I asked. I didn't have an answer. Her voice sounded smaller now than I had ever heard it. Inside the lobby, Marcus walked past the glass doors, speaking quietly with two staff members. Everything inside the Sterling was running exactly the way it should. Professional. Controlled. Mom, I said gently, this night doesn't have to turn into something worse. I know. But it already has, she replied softly. A car pulled up at the valet stand behind us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then my mother said something I had waited a long time to hear. I think I need to understand your life better. I looked back at the glowing hotel behind me. That would be a good place to start. I'm not ready tonight, my mother added quietly. That's okay, I said. Inside the Sterling, the music picked up again. Laughter drifted faintly through the glass doors as the engagement party moved forward without me. Daniel checked the time. You handled that with more grace than most CEOs I know, he said. I smiled slightly. I didn't do anything special. You walked through the front door, he replied. For a moment, I looked back at the hotel, the same entrance where security had stopped me hours earlier. Funny how a door can mean something different depending on who believes they belong. And tonight? I finally stopped asking for permission. Daniel and I stepped away from the Sterling. Inside, the party continued: music, laughter, champagne. But something had changed. For the first time, the story my family told about me wasn't the only one in the room. I wasn't the invisible daughter anymore. If this moment resonated with you, stay where you are understood.